Charlie Kirk is gone. The words tore through the air like a thunderclap. A packed auditorium froze, the murmur of 1,000 conversations collapsing into stunned silence. For a moment it felt as if the building itself had stopped breathing. Then came the gasps, sharp, disbelieving, echoing like aftershocks across the room. Phones lit up instantly, trembling hands rushing to capture the breaking alert flashing in red banners. Charlie Kirk, conservative firebrand and Trump's youth warrior, has died. On screens across the nation, the footage replayed on a loop. Grainy, shaky cell phone video from the event showed the moment panic erupted. Security sprinting, people screaming, the camera tilting as someone dropped their device. Again and again, the same clip burned itself into the public mind, an endless cycle of disbelief. The ripple effect was immediate. Within minutes, Trump's motorcade was spotted racing toward a press podium hastily assembled outside a hotel ballroom. Reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward, their voices clashing in a storm. "Mr. Trump, what's your reaction? Was Kirk targeted? What does this mean for the movement?" His face was taut with fury, his words locked and loaded before the cameras even finished warming. Across the city, another camera lens found Barack Obama. Calm, composed, walking briskly through a corridor, as journalists peppered him with questions. "President Obama, what do you make of this? Do you have a message for the country? For Trump?" He did not answer yet. His silence spoke louder than any prepared statement. The weight in his eyes suggested he knew this moment carried more than grief. It carried history. The nation leaned in. Social feeds exploded with speculation, hashtags climbing at breakneck speed. Some called it tragedy. Others called it conspiracy. But everyone knew it was fuel. Fuel that would ignite the old fires, between two of America's most polarizing figures. Because this was not just about a man collapsing on a stage. This was about what he represented, and who would claim his memory. Trump, the defiant commander of grievance politics, and Obama, the measured voice of unity, were about to collide in a battle larger than any headline. And yet, as the news cycle spun faster, one truth lingered in the shadows. No one could predict that Charlie Kirk's death would ignite the fiercest Trump versus Obama clash yet. Charlie Kirk was not just another name on the endless roster of political commentators. He was the megaphone of a generation of conservatives who longed to feel like warriors in a culture war. Barely out of his teens when he founded Turning Point USA, he turned college campuses into battlegrounds, waging ideological combat with quick sound bites, viral videos, and a gift for turning applause into ammunition. For Trump, he was more than a supporter. He was the youth arm of the movement, the bridge to a restless demographic that didn't just vote, but shouted, marched, and shared. Kirk's death struck like a crack of lightning in clear skies. One moment he was at the center of a stage, chest out, voice booming with the certainty of someone who believed history was on his side. The next moment, that stage became the scene of chaos, sirens, and disbelief. For conservatives, it was as if their youthful energy had been ripped away in an instant. His absence was not just personal, it was symbolic. But the shock was not contained within one party. Liberals, progressives, and even political independents felt the tremor. For them, Charlie Kirk had long been a foil, a provocateur whose words ignited fury and whose debates often seemed designed to wound rather than persuade. And yet, his sudden fall forced even his fiercest critics to pause. Death silences arguments, leaving only the human questions. What did his life mean? What vacuum has it left behind? The political landscape trembled. Every side saw in his passing a mirror of their own fears. Conservatives whispered about martyrdom, about enemies in the shadows. Progressives wondered what new narrative Trump would spin from the ashes. Journalists flooded networks with hot takes, and hashtags flooded feeds like storm surges, clashing in digital skirmishes that mirrored the very divide Kirk had built his brand upon. But underneath the noise, one fact lingered. America was already fragile. The nation teetered on the edge of its own divisions, struggling with questions of identity, belonging, and the bitter taste of polarization. And now, with Kirk gone, the wound seemed to widen. His death was not just an end, it was an accelerant. The people felt it in their bones. Something bigger was about to unfold. Crowds gathered outside studios, campuses, and churches. Memorials turned into rallies, vigils blurred into protests. From microphones to megaphones, the message was clear. This was not going to be another headline that disappeared in the cycle. This was going to be remembered, and it was going to be used. And all eyes turned to the man who had benefited most from Kirk's loyalty, Donald Trump. His allies promised a thunderous statement. His critics braced for a storm. Would he grieve? Would he lash out? Would he seize the moment to rally his base as only he could? The air was thick with anticipation. Journalists refreshed feeds, cameras zoomed, and the crowd outside his hotel ballroom grew restless. Because everyone knew that when Donald Trump stepped up to the microphone, grief would not be the only thing on display. His words were never just words. They were weapons, sharpened to cut, shaped to inflame. And when the cameras turned to Trump, his words lit a firestorm. Donald Trump had always thrived in moments of chaos. To him, crisis was not an obstacle, but an opportunity. Unity. A chance to dominate headlines, to bend tragedy into narrative, to ensure that the spotlight never strayed far from his figure. Charlie Kirk's death, sudden and shocking, was no exception. Trump's entry into politics had always carried the aura of spectacle. He did not speak to persuade, he spoke to conquer. His rallies were not conversations but arenas, filled with chants and slogans crafted for repetition, not reflection. Pride was his currency, division his fuel. He had mastered the art of turning enemies into caricatures and grievances into applause lines. To his supporters, he was the warrior they had been waiting for. To his opponents, he was the embodiment of everything corrosive in American politics. Charlie Kirk fit seamlessly into this orbit. Young, unrelenting, and brash, Kirk became the extension of Trump's message into the halls of academia. Where Trump commanded stadiums, Kirk prowled campuses. He built Turning Point USA into a youth army, armed not with policy but with passion, memes, and a taste for confrontation. For Trump, Kirk was not just a supporter. He was proof that the movement had legs beyond its aging base. He gave Trump something priceless: youth. But Trump's reliance on Kirk revealed subtle contradictions. Publicly, he showered Kirk with praise, calling him a patriot, a fighter, a visionary. Privately, insiders whispered that Trump saw him as a useful tool, a lightning rod for energy that could be redirected at will. Trump's loyalty was never unconditional. His loyalty lasted as long as utility lasted. And Kirk, ambitious as he was, seemed willing to play the role, believing that proximity to Trump meant proximity to power. It was a symbiosis built on calculation. Trump needed a youthful mouthpiece to sell his vision to college students who might otherwise dismiss him. Kirk needed the legitimacy that only Trump's blessing could prove it could. Together, they staged rallies, shared slogans, and crafted a narrative of generational revolt against the so-called establishment. Yet in the very moment of Kirk's death, those contradictions came into focus. Trump spoke of him as a brother in arms, a fallen soldier for freedom. His voice carried the tone of grief, but his eyes carried something else, a glint of opportunity. The cameras lingered on his expression as he declared that Kirk had been silenced by forces who wanted to crush the movement. He framed the loss not as a tragedy to mourn, but as a weapon to wield. It was vintage Trump. Loyalty draped in spectacle, mourning transformed into mobilization. His pride could not allow him to simply bow his head and reflect. Instead, he turned Kirk into a symbol of sacrifice, an emblem of the fight to come. And his audience, primed to see enemies everywhere, erupted into chants that blurred grief with rage. Yet there was an unease beneath the surface. Some wondered, was this about Charlie Kirk, or was this about Trump himself? Was this loyalty or opportunism cloaked in loyalty's garb? Even among his inner circle, the question lingered. Trump's words elevated Kirk, but they also elevated Trump. The grief-stricken moment doubled as a rallying cry for his own cause, ensuring that the spotlight returned, as always, to him. The villain's shadow grew taller that night, his rhetoric once again turning division into spectacle. He had lost an ally, but in losing him, he had found another stage. But across the country, another figure prepared his own response. Barack Obama had always carried himself with a quiet strength, the kind of presence that filled a room not by volume but by gravity. Where others raised their voices, he measured his words. Where others sowed division, he leaned on unity. And in a moment when the country shook under the weight of Charlie Kirk's sudden death, his presence once again became the mirror in which America saw its better self. His journey was never one of easy inheritance. He, born of a Kenyan father and a Kansan mother, raised with the complexity of multiple worlds colliding, he knew the feeling of being both insider and outsider. That duality became his power. He spoke to immigrants who carried accents, to workers who carried burdens, to students who carried dreams. His rise to the presidency was not just political, it was deeply symbolic. He embodied the possibility that America's divisions could be healed, not by erasing difference, but by embracing it. This was why his voice, even years after leaving office, still carried weight. When Barack Obama spoke, the country leaned in, not because it agreed with every word, but because it sensed a rare thing: authenticity. He never denied the fractures of the nation, but he framed them as challenges to be faced, not weapons to be wielded. And it was that history that made his presence now so significant. For years, he and Trump had stood as opposites, mirror images reflecting two radically different visions of America. Trump reveled in fire and grievance. Obama chose calm and patience. Trump built crowds by targeting enemies. Obama built audiences by inviting them in. Their clashes had never been just about policies. They were about identity, about what kind of story America wanted to tell itself. In the wake of Charlie Kirk's death, that contrast could not be sharper. Trump had already taken the moment and spun it into a storm, his anger filling the airwaves. But Obama moved differently. He did not rush to cameras or chase microphones. He waited. He listened. He gave the nation space to breathe before entering the conversation. It was restraint, not weakness, but discipline. It was the mark of someone who knew that words spoken too soon could inflame, but words spoken at the right time could heal. His past carried countless examples of this balance. When communities erupted after violence, he was the one who arrived with messages of dignity and resilience. When hate reared its head in churches or rallies, he reminded the nation of its unfinished work toward justice. He did not promise perfection, but he promised progress. And in every speech his cadence carried hope like a steady drumbeat, a rhythm that reminded listeners that despair was not the final word. Now, as Charlie Kirk's passing pushed America once again into a spiral of finger-pointing and fear, Obama stood as the counterweight. For many, he represented the dignity that Trump seemed to mock. For others, he was the calm after the storm, the reminder that leadership did not have to shout to be heard. His symbolic weight was greater than any title. He was the voice people searched for when noise threatened to drown out meaning. Crowds gathered outside his foundation offices, reporters clustering at every exit. They shouted questions about Kirk, about Trump, about the movement. And though he kept his silence at first, his very restraint became a statement. He would not let grief be cheapened into theater. He would wait until the nation was ready to hear, not just react. It was empathy, not calculation, that defined him here. He understood that even those who opposed Kirk's politics were stunned by the loss of someone so young, so abrupt a departure. He understood that the families and communities grieving needed acknowledgement before the political winds swept everything away. And in that understanding he prepared to speak, not to win, not to score points, but to steady the ground trembling beneath everyone's feet. This was the Obama the world remembered, the man who confronted chaos with reflection, who responded to division with reminders of shared humanity. Against Trump's theatrical firestorm, it would offer a stillness that was no less powerful. Because sometimes, the most disarming act in a world of noise is silence. Silence that precedes words chosen with care. And when he finally spoke, the silence was deafening. Donald Trump wasted no time. Standing before a sea of red hats and waving flags, he leaned into the microphone and let his voice boom with fury. Charlie Kirk's death, he declared, was not just a tragedy. It was proof of the war being waged on his movement. He painted Kirk as a martyr, a young warrior struck down while fighting for America's future. The crowd roared, fists pumping, their chants rising into the night air like an anthem of anger. On social media, hashtags erupted within minutes. #Justice for Charlie, #Stop the Left. Trump was right. The narrative spread like wildfire. Commentators on conservative networks echoed his words, repeating them until they became gospel. Kirk was no longer just a strategist or an organizer. He was the symbol of a movement under siege. And Trump, in that moment, styled himself as the only one strong enough to carry Kirk's torch forward. He promised vengeance. He promised to expose the enemies within. His language was sharp, each line designed to wound, to divide, to harden the battle lines. But across the nation, another voice began to rise. Barack Obama, after days of silence, finally stepped before the cameras. The tone could not have been more different. Where Trump's fists clenched, Obama's hands opened. Where Trump shouted, Obama spoke in measured rhythm, his pauses as deliberate as his words. He began not with accusation, but with acknowledgement. He mourned Charlie Kirk's passing, reminding America that death, even of those we disagree with, deserves dignity. He spoke of loss not as a weapon, but as a wound that deserved care. Then, slowly, he pivoted. His voice sharpened, not with volume, but with clarity. He asked whether turning tragedy into political theater honored Kirk's memory or exploited it. He questioned the morality of leaders who used grief as fuel for division, and with each sentence, the contrast grew starker. Trump's fire against Obama's calm light. Social media lit up again, but this time with a different kind of energy. Clips of Obama's remarks spread with captions like, "This is leadership," and, finally, some dignity. Hashtags began to counter Trump's blaze. #Words matter, #led with grace, #hope over hate. For every voice shouting Trump's narrative, another rose to defend Obama's. The country wasn't just watching a debate, it was living inside it. The clash spilled into living rooms, into classrooms, into workplaces. Families argued at dinner tables, co-workers debated during lunch breaks, and every network split-screened their coverage between Trump's fiery rallies and Obama's steady addresses. The stakes felt larger than one man's death. It was about the soul of the nation, about what kind of country America wanted to become in the wake of loss. And yet, as the exchanges intensified, the ground beneath the debate began to shift. Trump doubled down, his speeches turning darker, more conspiratorial. He claimed Kirk's death was no accident, hinting at shadowy forces, pointing fingers without evidence. His supporters cheered louder, fueled by outrage. Obama, meanwhile, refused to descend into the same spiral. He countered with facts, with reminders of shared humanity, with piercing questions that cut through the fog of suspicion. Their words became more than statements. They became weapons, wielded on opposite sides of the cultural battlefield. Trump framed himself as the warrior avenger. Obama stood as the moral compass. Every American watching was forced to choose. Rage or reason, vengeance or dignity. And then came the moment that shattered the debate wide open. The auditorium was silent when Barack Obama stepped forward for what would become the defining moment of the clash. The lights caught the edges of his face, AHC, calm silhouette against the storm Trump had unleashed. The audience leaned in, breath held, waiting for words that might anchor them in the chaos. He didn't rush. He let the silence stretch, heavy and deliberate, as if even the air knew something historic was about to be spoken. Finally, his voice broke the stillness, soft, steady, almost conversational. "Charlie Kirk is gone," he began, the simple sentence carrying a weight that Trump's fire had stripped away. He paused, letting the words linger. And no matter where you stood on his politics, he was a son, a friend, a man who believed he was serving his country. A murmur swept the crowd. Recognition, empathy, the human note missing from the rhetoric of vengeance. Then Obama leaned forward, his voice sharpening. "But let me say this clearly. When we take tragedy, and we twist it into a weapon, when we turn grief into a prop for our own ambition, we dishonor not just the person we claim to mourn, but the nation we claim to serve." Gasps rippled through the hall. Trump, seated off to the side, stiffened. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed. For once, the confidence he usually wore like armor seemed to crack. Obama pressed on, his cadence building, deliberate but forceful. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. Every word carried weight. "We've heard talk of enemies. We've heard blame hurled without evidence, anger spread without end. But here's the truth. Grief belongs to families, not to politicians looking for another headline. Leadership means healing wounds, not deepening them." The crowd erupted in applause, but Obama raised a hand, and the room quieted instantly. He wanted silence, not noise. He wanted reflection, not frenzy. "And so I ask you," he continued, his tone now piercing, "what kind of America do we want to be? One where loss becomes fuel for rage, or one where loss reminds us of our shared humanity?" The audience rose to their feet, but again he held them, commanding restraint. The effect was electric, suspense layered on dignity, drama carved out of calm. He turned his head slightly toward Trump without naming him. "Real strength is not measured in how loud you can shout. Real strength is measured in how deeply you can listen." Trump's face flushed. For a man who thrived on dominance, on commanding every stage he touched, the moment cut deeper than any insult could. He shifted in his chair, his usual swagger reduced to restlessness. For the first time, it looked as though the performance had slipped out of his control. Obama's words flowed like a current, pulling the audience with him. "Charlie Kirk believed in fighting for his future. You may disagree with his methods, with his politics, but he believed. And I believe that if we honor anything about him, it should be that spirit, not by turning him into a weapon of division, but by committing ourselves to something greater than our own ego." The hall thundered with applause this time, unstoppable. Phones lit up like stars in the night as clips were recorded, posted, shared. Within seconds, hashtags exploded across social media. #mic drop moment, #truth over Trump, #Obama vs Trump. Tweets flew, videos spread, and the world outside the auditorium felt the tremor. Obama wasn't finished. He slowed, letting the audience settle, and then delivered the strike that would echo far beyond the room. "You see, leadership is not about making yourself the center of the story when someone else has lost their life. Leadership is about stepping aside and letting compassion take the stage. Anything else, anything less, is not leadership. It's theater." The words landed like a hammer. Cameras zoomed in on Trump, whose expression betrayed fury he could no longer mask. His lips pressed tight, his eyes darted to the crowd. Once his crowd, ties, hat now rose in ovation for his greatest rival. And then it happened. The pause. Obama let the clapping swell, then quiet, until only the sound of breath and anticipation remained. He leaned into the mic, his voice a whisper sharp enough to cut. "America deserves more than theater." The hall exploded, this time uncontrollable, a wave of cheers, whistles, and chants. Reporters scribbled furiously. Commentators watching live feeds began declaring it one of the most devastating political takedowns in memory. Social media surged as clips of the line went viral, repeated endlessly, remixed into videos, pasted onto memes. It was the mic drop moment, a calm, dignified counterattack that stripped Trump of his usual dominance. And Trump knew it. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair, knuckles white. He tried to rise, to interrupt, but the sound swallowed him. For once, he wasn't the center. For once, his words had been drowned out before he could even speak them. Obama stepped back, giving a small nod, almost modest, as if to remind the crowd that this wasn't about him. But the audience knew they had witnessed something historic. The speech had ended, but the reverberations were only beginning. Across the country, homes buzzed with debate, timelines refreshed with arguments and celebrations. Trump supporters doubled down, furious, while progressives cheered louder than ever. Pundits filled screens with analysis, each insisting they'd just seen the clash of two visions for America distilled into one moment. And yet, as the applause finally began to fade, something unexpected loomed just beyond the horizon. The cameras were still rolling, the crowd still electric, but history had not yet turned its final page. Because what happened after the speech took everyone by surprise. The moment Obama's words hit the airwaves, the country erupted into a digital frenzy. Hashtags lit up Twitter like fireworks on the 4th of July. @Kirk Legacy, @Trump Meltdown, Obama Truth. Within an hour, they trended worldwide. Every platform, every feed, every conversation seemed pulled into the gravitational storm of that night's clash. Clips of the speech spread like wildfire. 15-second cuts of Obama's "America deserves more than theater" moment, remixed with cinematic music, slowed down for effect, captioned in bold letters across TikTok reels and Instagram stories. One meme went viral instantly. Trump's scowling face side by side with Obama's calm smile, the caption reading, "Anger versus dignity, you decide." Another featured Charlie Kirk's photo under the words, "Not a prop, a person." Cable news anchors sharpened their knives. On one side, commentators dissected every syllable of Obama's speech, hailing it as a masterclass in statesmanship. On the other, pro-Trump pundits scrambled to spin the moment, arguing it was exploitation dressed in compassion. But the split screen told its own story. On the right half of America's televisions, Trump at a rally the very next evening, his voice raw with fury, accusing Obama of hijacking a moment of mourning. His crowd roared, fists pumping, chanting Kirk's name as if to reclaim it from the headlines. Red hats waved, banners soared, and Trump declared, "We will not let them steal Charlie's legacy." On the left half, a vigil organized by young progressives, candles flickering against the night sky. Obama's words were played back over a loudspeaker, met not with chants, but with silence, nods, tears, and applause at every pause. College students, immigrants, and community leaders stood shoulder to shoulder, repeating the hashtag Kirk Legacy, but redefining it, not as a partisan tool, but as a reminder of youth, belief, aid, and the fragile thread of democracy. The cultural wave reached far beyond politics. Celebrities jumped into the fray. A-list actors tweeted lines from Obama's speech. Singers posted candlelit photos with captions like, "America deserves more than theater." Late-night hosts pounced, mocking Trump's meltdown with parody clips and viral skits. Within days, TikTok creators reenacted the showdown, some lip-syncing Obama's words to dramatic music, others humorously cutting Trump's scowls into GIF loops captioned, "When you realize you just got outplayed." But the impact wasn't all laughter. For many, something deeper stirred. Comment sections filled with confessions, young people admitting they'd never cared about politics until now, immigrants writing that Obama's words gave them pride, conservatives quietly acknowledging they wished Trump had chosen empathy over fury. Yet the battleground only widened. Fox News aired a 2-hour special framing Obama's speech as cold political theater, while MSNBC replayed it with reverent commentary, calling it the speech that reset the tone of America. On radio shows, callers fought, cried, shouted. On Reddit threads, essays stretched thousands of words as users debated whether the clash marked a turning point or just another cycle of outrage. The split-screen America had seen on television became the split-screen America lived in real time. One half chanting Trump's fire, the other half whispering Obama's calm. And in the middle of all the noise, memes, hashtags, pundits, celebrities, one question pulsed. Whose version of Charlie Kirk's legacy would survive? That was the true battle now. Not over who won the debate, but over what the death of a young conservative voice would mean for the future. Would it fuel division, as Trump demanded? Or would it remind the country, as Obama urged, that grief should not be weaponized, that dignity was the higher ground? The clash had spilled far beyond a single stage. It was now in living rooms, classrooms, TikTok feeds, and church pews. The air buzzed with opinion, anger, inspiration. But as the noise reached its peak, one lesson began to emerge, clear, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. And yet, in the noise, one clear lesson emerged. Charlie Kirk's death was never just a headline. It was the spark that lit a fire far bigger than politics, a fire that forced America to confront itself, to ask what kind of nation it wants to be. In the clash between Trump's fury and Obama's dignity, we saw two visions collide, one rooted in anger, the other in calm truth. And in that collision, we were reminded that every moment of division is also a test of who we are. This story is not about one man's fall, nor about two rivals locked in combat. It is about us, the audience, the citizens, the future. Because in the silence after Obama's words, in the roar of Trump's rally, in the hashtags and the headlines, one truth rose above the noise. Dignity outlasts rage. Truth outshines theater. Unity is stronger than division. The choice is ours. We can let grief be weaponized, turned into another battle scar in a culture war that leaves no winners. Or we can rise above, choosing to honor legacies with compassion and to confront power with dignity. This channel exists for that choice, for the voices who believe America is more than a stage for anger. If you felt this story moved you, if you believe truth matters, if you know deep down that unity must always outlast division, then this is your movement too. So subscribe, share this story. Add your voice to the thousands who believe that history bends toward dignity, not arrogance. Be part of this movement. Not tomorrow, not someday, but now. Because the clash is not over. It never was. And the question that began with Charlie Kirk's death still echoes tonight. What side of history will you choose?